A father's love. Deep in the forest, there was a warm little cabin where Father Bear and Little Bear lived together. Father Bear prepared food and supplies outside the cabin. Little Bear sat nearby, looking bored and lost in thought. Little Bear watched the other forest animals playing happily, his eyes filled with curiosity and envy. One day, Father Bear took Little Bear to the edge of the forest. His voice was gentle, but serious. "You may go anywhere inside the forest," Father Bear said, "but you must never go beyond it." So Little Bear played with the rabbits, the deer, and the birds deep inside the forest. But when the games were over, Little Bear would stand at the forest's edge and wonder about the world outside. From behind, Father Bear always watched over him with quiet, careful eyes. "Why won't Father Bear let me go outside?" Little Bear wondered. One afternoon, a fox appeared and began to speak to Little Bear. The fox sat beside Little Bear and spoke with a clever smile. Little Bear listened very closely. He pointed beyond the trees and spoke of a world outside, a place full of freedom, wonder, and excitement. Little Bear's eyes began to shine. The more he listened, the more he longed to go outside. The fox whispered, "Maybe Father Bear doesn't want you to know how big the world really is." Alone beneath a tree, Little Bear looked toward the boundary. For the first time, he began to doubt Father Bear. That evening, Father Bear prepared honey and fruit for supper. But Little Bear could not stop thinking about the world outside. As dusk fell, Little Bear packed a tiny bag and quietly crept toward the forest's edge. He looked back at the cabin one last time. Then he stepped beyond the forest. Outside the forest, everything felt wide and new. Little Bear ran through the open meadow in delight. But soon he had gone too far. When Little Bear turned around, the forest was far behind him. Then the world grew quiet. Strange rustling moved through the grass, and Little Bear began to feel afraid. A hunter appeared in the distance, and then another. Little Bear had been seen. Terrified, Little Bear ran as fast as he could. The hunters came after him. Little Bear reached a rocky dead end. The hunters were getting closer. High above, the eagle saw the hunters closing in. He flew back to Father Bear as fast as he could. Father Bear found Little Bear just in time. Behind them, the hunters were already too close. There was only one narrow path back to the forest. Father Bear pushed Little Bear toward it and stood between him and the hunters. As Little Bear ran, a loud shot echoed through the valley. He looked back and saw Father Bear fall. Back at the forest's edge, Little Bear broke down in tears. At last, he understood Father Bear had only wanted to protect him. The animals of the forest came to honor Father Bear, holding his father's keepsake. Little Bear finally understood the greatest love of all.